بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا المرسلين. In the last 3 weeks we covered the aspects of the early seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, where we find that he himself and the Muslims were all persecuted. So 3 weeks ago we looked at how the Prophet ﷺ himself was abused. Then 2 weeks ago we looked at how the enemies of the Prophet ﷺ, how they use different tactics to abuse the Prophet ﷺ and to abuse the Muslims. And then last week we spoke about how the Sahaba radiallahu anhum were abused. So there was a different torture of the Sahaba radiallahu anhum. So then obviously as a result of all of these problems which they had, all of these different oppositions which were in place against the Muslims, the Prophet ﷺ gave permission to the Sahaba to migrate to Abyssinia. And obviously the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, they had been undergoing this persecution, and this was something which would have been on a lot of their minds. But here the Prophet ﷺ himself, he encouraged them to go and migrate. And obviously the Prophet ﷺ himself was aware that the king in Abyssinia was a king who looks after the people and he doesn't oppress people. So this is why the Prophet ﷺ recommended that they go to Abyssinia. So this is eventually what the Muslims all planned to do. So they all got together and they tried to make an attempt to go to Abyssinia. So in the first party which went, there was only 12 Muslims, 12 men, and just a few ladies, about 5 females went as well. And in this immigration, when they were trying to leave, very soon the Quraysh, they found out that the Muslims are trying to leave Makkah, they're trying to escape, essentially. These are the Muslims who are being tortured. And within them also there was Uthman bin Affan, radiallahu anhu, who was in the first immigration, and also he had his wife with him, which was Ruqayya radiallahu anhu. So, and he was the daughter of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's daughter, Uthman radiallahu anhu, and a few other Sahaba, they went on this journey. So when they had gone, then the people of Makkah, they found out that the Muslims had escaped. So then they tried to chase them, but very fortunately for the Muslims, what they had was that obviously they're trying to escape to Abyssinia, and in order to get there you have to go over the sea. And they went to the port of Jeddah, and when they got there, just when the Muslims got there, there was actually a merchant who had his ship, and he was trying to go to Abyssinia already. So he was happy to accommodate the Muslims, and he charged them about 5 dirhams, and a very good amount, and the Muslims, they joined and managed to get across to Abyssinia. And this was very helpful because the Quraysh, as soon as they found out that the Muslims have escaped, they were chasing the Muslims already. But the point where they would have caught the Muslims would have been at the seashore, where the Muslims would have been waiting for a boat. But because the Muslims had already gone, by the time the Quraysh got there, the Muslims had already managed to get away. So the Quraysh couldn't capture them, and they ended up going.
Wait, I'm confused. Didn't they migrate to Medina first? Yeah. Went to Abyssinia straight away?
Yeah, the Muslims went to Abyssinia first.
But Medina came from.
Yeah. So this is, remember, this is in the 5th year of prophethood. So remember, they went to Medina, as we know, in the 13th year. So when the Prophet ﷺ was giving da'wah, very early they go to Abyssinia. This is to, people say that one of the main reasons is to get away from the persecution. Yeah. So some people say that, the Sahaba, they found it too hard, so they went away. But the real reason is that the Sahaba radiallahu anhu, they had an option to travel on the world. And the Prophet ﷺ says, تَفَرَّقُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ, that travel in the world, split out, go somewhere else. Because there's no point, for no reason, to endure persecution. There's no benefit to that. So although there was da'wah taking place there, the Prophet ﷺ said to the ones that were oppressed and wanted to leave, that you can go and live in Abyssinia, and there you won't have to put up with all of these problems. Essentially, it'll be better for your iman. You'll actually be more conducive. You'll be able to actually achieve more and become even better Muslims. Spend some time actually getting to know Allah, and this is something which the Sahaba acted upon. This is one of the main reasons why they went there. But this was also, the migration to Medina was also, in a leadership state. As soon as the Prophet ﷺ came to Medina, he was essentially in charge of Medina at that time. So they gave him the authority. They were inviting him as a leader. Abyssinia, they were going just to live there, just to settle down, and we'll see from the stories how they lived there.
Is it Abyssinia you mean saying at the moment?
Is it?
Abyssinia.
Abyssinia, Ethiopia.
Ethiopia, okay.
Yeah. So I think North Ethiopia.
Yeah.
Ethiopia is quite big.
Okay.
Abyssinia, I think it's
Yeah,
just.
because I heard saying that, just I'm talking about
So obviously the Arabic is Habasha,
not how much.
and then Ethiopia is more of a recent name which came. But originally it was called Habasha, and then the English is Abyssinia. Abyssinia comes from Habasha.
Yeah, okay.
Ethiopia is a completely new name, which goes
Now, if you said Habasha, it would be more easier for me.
Habasha.
It's like
we
Lifestyle,
don't
they call
have-
it Saudi Arabia.
one of these names. So what happened is we had so there was 11 men and 5 women, and then when they got there, they all settled down. They were all living comfortably. Remember, they went in Rajab, so they left in Rajab from Makkah. Then when they got there in Rajab, they settled down, and they had a very good, settling down. They were all living very comfortably. So when the Muslims were living comfortably, they were happy then. They had no reason to come back. But then what happened in that same year? Remember, 50 year of Prophet in Ramadan of this year. So we have Rajab, Shaban, Ramadan. 2 months after they get to Abyssinia, Prophet ﷺ, he comes into the Kaaba. He comes into Makkah, and he comes into the Kaaba, and there's many of the leaders of the Quraysh sitting there. And the Prophet ﷺ, he starts suddenly comes in and starts reciting some of the Quran. He starts reciting Surah Najm, and when he's reciting Surah Najm, then this is actually something very rare, because he does this very, very suddenly. So when he starts reciting Surah Najm, this is not something which the Quraysh are used to hearing. Remember, one of the first things the Quraysh did was they banned the reciting of the Quran in public. When Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu recited the Quran in public, he was beaten very much. So this is something they banned. So you're not allowed to read the Quran. If the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to recite the Quran, they would all start making noise. This comes in the Quran, that they say وَالْغَوْ فِيهِ, that whenever the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam comes and recites the Quran, then just do just random things, just make some noise, and then keep doing this. And then they even used to say لَعَلَّكُمْ تَغْلِبُونَ, so that you can overpower the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is trying to recite, and you recite as well, you will overpower him. In fact, the Quran even mentions to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that وَلَا تَجْهَرْ بِالصَّلَاةِ, you don't have to try and compete with them by going very loud or going too quietly. You stay at the normal voice. You do not have to compete with these people. So now, for them to actually hear the Quran firsthand from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, believe it or not, was actually a rare occurrence, because they wouldn't let it happen. In fact, they sent that one person to Syria, and they sent him to Persia to learn the stories of the people of Persia, and then he came back and he would tell these stories in the Kaaba, and he would compete against the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So now the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam suddenly starts reading Surah Najm in the Kaaba, and there's many leaders of the Quraysh there, and he's reading in his beautiful voice. First hand, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, imagine he's reading the Quran, and everybody is taken aback. Everybody is, they're shocked. They don't know what to do. They're awestruck by this. They don't really know how to respond to this, and they're just listening, and they're taken in. They're entranced by the reciting of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam carries on reciting. Obviously, Surah Najm, it's not that short, but he recites the whole of Surah Najm, and he reaches the end. And the very last verse is a verse of sajda, where if you listen to it, you have to do sajda. And in fact, there's a command. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, do sajda, worship Allah and do sajda. This is what it means. So when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam recites this, he falls into sajda, as is per the requirement of reciting the surah, a sajda verse. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam falls into sajda, and along with him, everybody who's in the Kaaba also falls into sajda with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So leaders of the Quraysh have been listening to the Quran, and they were so taken in that they fell into sajda with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, accidentally almost, you can say. Subconsciously they done this with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they felt it. And this caused a big problem for them, because then later, not everybody wasn't in the Kaaba at the same time. Many of the leaders were at home at that time. So they came little bit later, and they asked the other people that, why are you doing sajda to the words of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? And obviously they had to make up a story. The story they made up was that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was praising our idols as well. So they said he was praising our idols. He was saying good things about our idols. So because he was saying good things about our idols, we thought, he's converted to, the religion of his forefathers. So they got happy. And then this is the reason they spread. That because he changed, that's why we done sajda. And the other people, obviously, when they found out, they said, how can you do sajda to a false religion? This is what they were saying to them. So now this story, obviously, some people lied about it, it got a bit out of hand. Rumors spread about this story. And rumors about this story spread all the way to Abyssinia, to the extent that the people in Habasha, the time the rumor got to them, the rumor they heard was that all of Makkah has become Muslim. This is what they heard. Somebody had heard that the Quraysh are doing sajda in the Kaaba. So they believed the whole of Makkah has become Muslim now. This is what they believed. So imagine, it's great news. It's amazing. Imagine if you escaping from Makkah, leaving your hometown. This is one thing we have to realize when they went to Abyssinia. It's that they're leaving their homeland where they have respect, where their family is, where they have their own businesses, where they have something to do. They may have a job there. So many things they have in Makkah, but they're leaving that, making that big sacrifice. So to find out the news that you can go back home, they were just settling there and hoping. The Prophet ﷺ had promised them that soon we'll get victory, which is either the Hijrah or we'll come and conquer Makkah, one of these two things. And then you can come back. But then these people thought that would be in the long distant future. Suddenly they get news that the Makkans have become Muslim. So they all leave Abyssinia and they start going back to Makkah. And when they're just 1 hour away from Makkah, approximately, this is when they find out that, this news is fake and the rumor is fake. So then some of them, obviously there's only about 20 of them, so some of them go back to Abyssinia, a few of them. And the rest of them, they entered into Makkah. Some of them entered privately and secretly into Makkah. And the rest of them, they entered under somebody's protection. So they asked somebody notable, somebody of influence, somebody who was respected, and they asked him to give them protection. So then some of them, they entered under this protection, so now they were not under attack from the other people. So this is what happened. These people now ended up coming back to Makkah. So essentially there's very few Muslims now in Abyssinia. Everybody's more or less come back. There's very few there. But what has happened is that these Muslims that went, they now have first-hand experience of Abyssinia. They now know that in Abyssinia we can live comfortably. So, first-hand they've realized that Abyssinia is a good place to go. So now they've got this experience and they've come back and now they're back in Makkah. So this is the first immigration which happens. And actually 2 immigrations happens to Abyssinia. Because as soon as they come back, the people that entered Makkah secretly, they are abused by the people of Makkah, and they find it difficult because they're abused by the people of Makkah. So now again there's a need for another immigration, and almost now it's an even bigger problem because now the Quraysh are aware of the plan. Remember that when they first went to Abyssinia, the Quraysh chased them to the boat and they saw they're going to Abyssinia. Now the Quraysh know that Muslims will plan to go to Abyssinia. But the second immigration, it was planned very, very quickly and very cleverly by the Muslims. So they planned it very quickly and got everyone together very quickly. And obviously the help of Allah was there as well, and they chased the Muslims, they didn't want to let them go this time because they know that it's going to be difficult to cross the sea and get them. But the Muslims, they managed to get away. And there's different narrations which explain how the Muslims, they ended up in Abyssinia at this time. They got away from the Quraysh. And again they get to Abyssinia, this time they're settled down. And again they've escaped from the Quraysh. Now, remember the Quraysh were angry. They never wanted to let them go. So originally when they went, they tried to stop them, they got away. Again, they tried to chase them, they got away. Now they're thinking that we can't go to Abyssinia and chain them up and drag them because they're not in our jurisdiction. They're out of our police force doesn't work there, basically. That's not our area to cover.
Another country.
It's not, sorry?
It's another country.
It's another country, absolutely. We have no power there. So we're going to have to talk to their leaders. So now the Quraysh, they said that in order to speak to their leader, we'll actually send a delegation. We'll send a group to these people. and they'll come to the king and they will approach the king. They'll convince the king to give us our, they call them slaves, our captives. They'll give them back. So obviously the people from the Quraysh, they chose two people. They chose As bin Wa'il. They chose Amr bin As, and they chose Abdullah bin Abi Rabi'a. So these are the two people, two noble people of the Quraysh who they chose. And Amr bin As, he was actually known to have a very, very strong connection with the king of Quraysh. So this is one of the reasons that they sent him, because he's connected. And the people, they sent them very expensive gifts to give to the people of Abyssinia, to give to you have the king, you have his courtiers, you have his ministers, all of these people. So these two people came on behalf of the Quraysh. They came to see the courtiers first, the ministers. And they bribed all of the ministers with the gifts. So they gave them all gifts. And they said that, these people are now living in Abyssinia and they've run away from Makkah. So we want to, recapture them. We can't have them ruining your country. So then the big aim was that these people, they should be handed back without too much discussion, without looking into the matter too much. We don't want to trial. We don't want justice here. We just want them back. Let's do it quickly. This is why they bribed the ministers, and the ministers supported this idea. So now the next day they actually had an appointment to go and see the king. So now they've already spoken to the ministers and they've convinced the ministers. And now they come in front of the king and they present the idea that we have people who have run away from Makkah, tearaways. They've left our religion. They've left the religion of their forefathers. It's not Christianity. Remember, the king of Abyssinia was a Christian. Saying it's not Christianity. No one's heard of this religion. It's a new religion. And they've run away from the religion of their forefathers. Please, we don't want them to escape from us. We need to keep this under control. So then they said this to the king, and the king, being the fair person he said, we will at least listen to what they have to say. We will call them. And this was what they didn't want to happen. That's why they were trying to bribe the people in the first place, that we don't want any trial here. We just want to quickly take them. Because obviously if they're going to speak the truth, then the king, is a wise man. He's going to see the truth. They didn't want the truth to come out. They didn't want any speaking to happen. So the king called the Muslims, and obviously here we have the very famous speech of Ja'far radiallahu ta'ala, who he made the speech. So this is when they went for the second immigration. So the Quraysh sent the delegation as well. So these are the things which the Quraysh did. In the second, there was about 86 men that went. And again, if ladies were 18 or 19. So there was about just over 100 of the people altogether now. A bit more than last time as well. So this is what we see. So now they sent these two people to go and deal with these people. And now the king, when the Muslims walked in, another thing which happened is that the Muslims, when they walked into the courthouse, generally everybody is expected to bow before the king. Everybody is expected to kind of do a ruku. But the Muslims, obviously, they're not going to do this. They said, we're not going to do ruku. So even before the Muslims had left, when the summon had come, the Muslims need to come to the courthouse. The Muslims obviously are very worried about this. So they discuss with each other, what are we going to say? He's going to ask us questions, what we're going to say. And they had already agreed that we're just going to say exactly what the Prophet ﷺ has promised, has already told us. The teachings of the Quran, which is given us, we're just going to mention these. We're going to pass these on. This is exactly what we're going to do. So this is what they had agreed to do. And when they came, they didn't try and, hide the facts which they thought may upset the king. But they said, we're just going to say exactly what the Prophet ﷺ has told us. We're not going to try and adapt it so it meets with Christianity, so that somehow he thinks we're good friends of Christians. We're not going to try and adapt it like this. Exactly what we've been told, what we had been taught as Islam, we're going to do this. So then they came into the court, and then they said, what is this religion? So now obviously they didn't bow before the king, and then they said, we don't bow before the Prophet ﷺ, the best man in the world. We don't bow before him. We're not going to bow before you. They said, even when we come to the Prophet ﷺ, we say salam. And they explained that this is our greeting. We say salam to each other. Prophet ﷺ teaches us that in Jannah we will have salam. So then the king wasn't angry at this, but he had told them the reason they're not doing this. And so then afterwards the king asks that, what is this prophet that you follow? What is this religion? Then Ja'far radiallahu anh, he now gives his speech. And basically he says that we used to do lots of bad things. We used to bury our daughters alive. We used to cheat one another. The people who had power, they would oppress the weak people. We used to treat our women badly. We used to treat our wives badly as well. We used to oppress everybody. We used to cheat. We used to do all these kind of things. And one of the main things, we used to worship many gods. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He took pity on us. This is the way He addressed it. Allah, He had mercy on us, and then He sent a messenger from His messengers. And he came to us with divine revelation. This messenger told us to be just. This messenger told us to spread salam. This messenger told us to, be fair with everybody, to not oppress each other. And then he said then he mentioned the pillars as well. The messenger tells us to believe in one God, the Tawheed, a lot of mention of Tawheed in this speech. And this messenger, he tells us to establish salah, to give zakat. And also, this messenger brought us all of these good things which we have. So as a result of all this, what we are doing is we are now going to follow this messenger. We believe this messenger brings us the truth from Allah. So we're going to follow this messenger. So they say that we follow this messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And what happened is we're trying to follow this messenger, and then the people of Makkah, they start oppressing us. Because we want to follow one Allah, we want to worship one Allah, the people of Makkah started to do oppression. So when this oppression became too much for us, what we did is we decided, our messenger, he gave us permission to migrate to Abyssinia, and we came to your land and we settled inside your land. And the Prophet of Allah told us to come and do this. And he said that when we're here, we will be, it's a line of action. We won't be wrong to go to Abyssinia. We'll be completely safe here. So this is what the Prophet ﷺ told. This is what they felt that they could do. So this is the speech which he did. And then the Prophet ﷺ mentioned that he gives us revelation and all these kind of things. And then the king asked them that this revelation which the Prophet ﷺ gets, that do you have anything from this revelation? And then Hazrat Jafar radiallahu anhu said, yes, I know many parts of it. And then he recited the beginning part of Surah Maryam, where obviously there's the discussion of Maryam alayhi salam, Zakaria alayhi salam, and obviously Isa alayhi salam, and his birth is mentioned here. And obviously all of this discussion takes place in Surah Maryam, and this is something which is relevant to the beliefs of the Christians as well, how the Muslims see the Christians. So this is one thing which was mentioned there as well. And when he read this, then obviously when he recited the Quran, again this is two times we find the value of the Quran. Firstly, when the Prophet ﷺ recited Surah Najm in front of the people of the Quraysh, the power of the Quran made them prostrate. Even here, even though they weren't Muslims, the Quraysh were there. When he recited Quran, everybody started crying. The king cried, his advisors were crying, and they were weeping. The king's beard was wet with tears. So much the Quran affected his heart. So they realized that this is something true, and this is one of the main reasons why the Quran was banned in Makkah, and another reason why the delegation from the Quraysh did not want a discussion. They did not want the Muslims to have a chance to read the Quran to the king, because this would be a big victory for the Muslims. It will show how true that what they're coming with is. So this is another thing which they didn't want to happen here. But when he recited this, then obviously everybody's hearts. And then, in fact, the king said that this Quran and that which Jesus, that which Isa alayhi salam brought, they are both from the same source. They're both from the same spiritual thing. They both come from the same place, basically. And this is something which he mentioned. And then he even explained that what the Muslims are saying is completely true. Then what happened after this day? Then the Muslims, obviously they were given this freedom to live, and the delegation basically lost. Then what happened is Amr bin al-As, he wasn't a Muslim at this time. He went on later to become a Muslim. But what he said is that I'm not happy. He wanted to try again, basically. He said, I'm not going home. I'm not giving up without a fight. And obviously one thing in his mind is that the Christians, they believe that Isa alayhi salam is the son of God. And he was under the impression that the king has this belief as well. So he said that what I will do is I will point this out, that they don't believe that Isa alayhi salam is the son of God. They think he's just a prophet of God, just an apostle. They don't believe he's the son. So now if I say this, they will start hating the Muslims for their beliefs. So what happened is he came to the king and he said this point. He said that they say very bad things about Isa alayhi salam. They said that the Muslims, they are very disrespectful to Isa alayhi salam. So now the Muslims are called again, and again they're very worried. And again, when they do mashwara and they say, and they have this mashwara between themselves, what are we going to say? Nobody says that we're going to try and find out what Christians think about Isa alayhi salam and try and make it match. They never even thought like this. Imagine the tension they would have been in, the worry and concern they would have had. They're having to come to this place. They're going to be basically taken by the Makkahs back to Makkah, and they're going to be tortured for running away as well. All of these things. But despite that, they never thought that let's try and make Islam in accordance with the way that he wants to hear. That again, it was right from the beginning that we're going to say what the Prophet has told us. So when they asked him, straight away they said that the Prophet ﷺ has told us that Isa alayhi salam is a messenger of Allah, he's a slave of Allah, and this is all he is. And he's the ruh of Allah, and this is what we've been told. We've not been told anything extra from this. And the king, when he heard this, he said that this is exactly what Isa alayhi salam himself said. And when he said this, many of the people there, they didn't like this. So they started, murmuring and saying that this is wrong. But the king himself, he wasn't having any of it. He said that this is absolutely right. This is what he's saying. This is what Christianity is as well.
This time we need to recite Surah Maryam exactly to explain everything about Jesus at this point.
No, he recited Surah Maryam on the first occasion because he asked to recite some of the Quran.
Okay.
But here he was asking for the details from the Prophet ﷺ. So the details were not given from Surah Maryam. This is what we have from the narrations. That when they first went, they recited, the king asked, give me some Quran. And they recited Surah Maryam in the first incident. And on the second time, although they had given some details, what had happened is this Amr bin As, he'd actually gone and tried to cause some trouble. What he'd said is, these Muslims, they have a problem with Isa alayhi salam. So in Surah Maryam, we have a brief definition of his birth, where he came from, where Allah mentions that he's not the son of Allah. But what Amr bin As said that there's not specific such a great thing said about the praise of Isa alayhi salam in those in the beginning of Surah Maryam. So one thing which they would have had in their minds is that they have a problem with Isa alayhi salam and they say bad things about him. And this obviously would have been blasphemous. If you're in a Christian country and you're saying bad things about Isa alayhi salam, this is what the problem would be. But obviously as Muslims we have a lot of respect for him and we really revere him. So this is what they were trying to put something on the Muslims which was completely opposite to what they were saying. This is why it was a very simple answer that we believe him to be a prophet of Allah. If you believe him to be a prophet of Allah, obviously he has a very, very high value in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then at this point, this is when the king said that these people, you are happy, you are absolutely fine to live in Abyssinia in complete peace. In fact, he offered them, and this was actually a victory for the Muslims. Both days were a big victory for the Muslims. Before, the Muslims were in Abyssinia, but they had no approval from the king. They had no approval from the government. So they weren't sure what might happen if somebody comes and causes trouble. But now they have firm approval. The king himself, he says, that go and live in freely. And in fact, he said to the people of Makkah, who had given the gifts to the advisors, he said that take these gifts back, and we're not going to be bribed by the things which you want to do. And this is, we're going to hear people, we're going to be fair with people, and this is not something fair which you are doing. So then they were told to go away, and they lost. And this is something in regards to the king of Abyssinia. After this, in fact, these people, they were living there, they were living in Abyssinia. So now, some of them, they stayed there for quite a long time, and they stayed in Abyssinia. Now, we remember there was, about 100 of them altogether. So a lot of them, they went back to Medina when the Prophet ﷺ migrated to Medina. So remember, the Prophet ﷺ and all the Muslims left Makkah and went to Medina. Some of them, who were still in Abyssinia at that time, as soon as they heard news of this, they immediately went to Medina. Whereas others, including Ja'far radiallahu anh, they didn't come back to Medina for a long time. They stayed in Abyssinia. So the Prophet ﷺ was in Medina, and the battles were happening, and the conquest of Khaybar, in fact, happened. And this is when Ja'far radiallahu anh and the group of Muslims came back from Abyssinia, very much into that. So we know there's about 24 of the people that migrated from Makkah to Abyssinia. They also participated in the Battle of Badr, which happened, I think, in the first year, just 1 year after they migrated to Medina. So we see that some of them came back, but also we know that Ja'far radiallahu anh came back at the time of Khaybar, which was 7 years after the original migration of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So some of them stayed there, some of them came back, and the king himself. So obviously, eventually, Ja'far radiallahu anh, when they were leaving, this narration is mentioned well that the king, he looked after him very well. He provided the Muslims provisions for their journey. He sent gifts for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In fact, he told Ja'far radiallahu anh to tell the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam to make dua for him. And when he came, then the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, Allahumma gfir lin Najashi, and he made this dua. And in fact, what happened is he actually sent guides as well. So the Muslims are going back to Medina, they might get lost or something. So Najashi added a couple of guides in, and these guys were his close advisors as well. So they went, dropped the Muslims off. Then the Muslims told him that Najashi requested du'as and given these gifts. And then the Prophet ﷺ, in front of the advisors, he made dua for Najashi as well. And then he went back. So basically, he looked after the Muslims very well. And also the Prophet ﷺ, he made dua for him specifically. And obviously, there's debate, a lot of the narrations they have that Najashi, he ended up becoming a Muslim. He ended up converting to Islam. And this is the main story that we have, where the Muslims, they left from Makkah and they went to Abyssinia. They came back and then they went a second time. And then basically they stay settled there. And then after this, we see Muslims, even in Makkah, they are converting to Islam. And the ones that are weak and finding it hard, they migrate and join the Muslims in Abyssinia. They would immediately leave and go to Abyssinia. This is something we would see happening in the year 5, 6, 7. And we find lots of people convert to Islam. Even the list of people who actually convert, many of them, we know they go on to become very, very prominent Muslims. Obviously, Uthman radiallahu anhu was there. And along with him, his wife, the daughter of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Ruqayya radiallahu anhu, she's there. Ja'far bin Abi Talib radiallahu anhu is also there. And from them we have different names. For example, Zubayr bin Awam, again, somebody who was, he was abused by his family as well. Again, he's somebody who left and also went to Abyssinia. We have a lot of the great Sahaba radiallahu anhum, Abdurrahman bin Auf radiallahu anhu as well. So some of the rich Sahaba, a lot of the very high quality, very high caliber of Sahaba, they actually migrated to Abyssinia. And then after the Prophet ﷺ came to Medina, they came back, and this is why we know that many of them were fighting the Battle of Badr as well. So this is again, it shows a lot of the pragmatism we have in Islam. That if you're getting abused in a certain land, you don't have to stay there and for no reason abuse yourself. You're allowed to move to somewhere else where you can practice your religion easier. So if it was difficult in Makkah, even though it's a blessed land, if Abyssinia is allowing you to become Muslims, and unfortunately nowadays, we see this around the world sometimes, that there's countries which are not Muslim countries, but they actually behave in more Islamic ways than the Muslim countries, and they actually are closer to the Sunnah. The political system may be closer to the Sunnah. The education system may be closer to the Sunnah. The health service may even be closer to the Sunnah. The way that the Prophet ﷺ worked towards, and Umar radiallahu anh eventually implemented in the Muslim world, the kind of system and organization, the police force, again, the way that it was all established there, is something which sometimes nowadays we find in these countries we can attain this. In these countries we're allowed to live as Muslims, sometimes better than even in our own countries, in the countries where Muslims are predominant.
Well, some Muslim countries are not allowed to do halaqa, like we are doing now after prayer,
Absolutely. So this is something which, again, some scholars say that Alhamdulillah, being in the United Kingdom is probably one of the best countries in the world to be able to act upon Islam, where you can do whatever, you can profess whatever you want to believe. And you don't have a problem, we have no problems. Economically, we don't have problems. We can sit and have our halaqah. In other countries, sometimes, for example, in our countries, we have very strict sectarianism. So you have like Fultalis, Barelvis, people that are very extreme in their love for the Prophet. Then you have people who are very extreme the other way. We have the Ahlul Hadith, these kind of sects who are very literal in their understanding. And then you have some other groups in the middle here, there and everywhere. And they have very strong hatred for each other. So if you're doing your own halaqah about you, and you're of a certain sect, then the other sect will be spreading their own trouble. To the extent that sometimes the Jummah Bayan in one masjid is just against the other masjid. And that masjid is doing their Jummah khutbah against the other masjid. Nobody's talking about Islam. They're just talking about each other. So this is one thing, alhamdulillah, being in these kind of areas, we have this ability just to, we have to focus on the Sunnah of Rasulullah. We can focus on the Quran. We can focus on improving our salah and actually becoming better human beings. rather than having to worry about, small things which aren't really that important. So I mean, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us all the ability to learn, many lessons from the Sunnah of the Prophet.
One of the things, when Joshua and some of his ministers and others saying that he became a Muslim, so they called him, so in front of all the people, and they said that we doubt that you came to be Muslim. No, this, and he came in front of everyone. So he wrote a piece of paper, La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, put it in his pocket, and he came in front of us, he said, whatever you believe, I believe in this, whatever you believe, I believe in this, and then this how
Yeah.
he was, is it true that I say, so he was saying, I believe in this. I don't know, he said, okay, he's not saying he hasn't come back.
Yeah.
I put La ilaha illallah Muhammad
Yeah,
Rasulullah in his pocket. Nobody saw, so he's pointing at this, I believe in
I've
this.
heard something like that.
Wasn't there another narration or something about where he drew a line in the middle and the floor with his staff?
With his stick, yeah.
And what did he say? I mean, do you know about that? Is there any details on that?
Yeah,
but they're talking about the two religions between this Christianity and Islam. There's not like a big line between them. But
That's what I'm saying. So when did he say that?
yeah, so basically it's similar. The way I said it is when he recited the verses of Surah Maryam, then he said that they're from the same source. That's how I said it. So basically, literally, some says that he drew a line, and then he said that they both emanate from the same thing. They don't deviate from each other in any way. That's what I'm doing.
Okay.